Hello everyone, my name is Sam Meltzer, and with me is Jaclyn. We are meteorologists with the National Weather Service in North Platte, Nebraska, and our presentation is on dust storms in Nebraska. As an overview, we'll go over the background of dust storms, some past events of dust storms that we found in Nebraska, how we can improve our messaging for the public, and future work.
So here's a quote from the North Platte Telegraph. It says, when asked what a driver should do if they come across a phenomenon, such as the low visibility from the blowing dust, Trooper Connolly said there was no great answer. So after we saw this quote from the North Platte Telegraph from that state trooper that said there was no great answer, it really kind of had us thinking that maybe we need to get better messaging out there since as Nebraskans, we really don't experience blowing dust too often. So that was kind of our driving force as to looking into some of these dust events.
NOAA defines dust storms as a severe weather event characterized by strong wind and dust-filled air over an extensive area. Oftentimes, especially on the news, you'll hear dust storms and haboobs used almost interchangeably, but those are two different things. Haboobs are the tall walls of dust associated with outflow boundaries. The dramatic pictures that you'll see coming out of Arizona in the summertime from those thunderstorms, those are haboobs. Dust storms are any case of dust-filled air associated with strong winds over an extensive area. So, I guess in short, all haboobs are dust storms, but not all dust storms are haboobs. And as for causes, like I said, outflow boundaries from thunderstorms are one cause of dust storms. Also, our frontal passages, those can create some fairly widespread areas of blowing dust, as well as agriculture activity. As machinery moves over dirt fields, that can help loft some of the dirt in the air, especially with a strong wind. Here are some of the impacts from dust storms. First, inhalation of dust is bad for sensitive groups. This can include people with asthma or other respiratory conditions, but it's also unhealthy for the elderly, the very young, and people who exercise or work outside. But really, inhaling dust is not good for anybody. And low visibility can lead to dangerous road conditions. As visibility drops, people can't see where they're going, and accidents, including some large pileups, can happen. This change in visibility is often sudden and unexpected to drivers, which makes it even more perilous. And highways are especially dangerous for accidents because vehicles are traveling very fast and reaction time is lower, especially if the drop in visibility is very sudden. Here are the headlines that are associated with dust events. First, we have dust storm warnings and dust advisories. These are for when visibility will drop to less than 1/4 mile. As of 2018, they are polygon-based. Before 2018, they were zone-based. And going from zones to polygons was especially a big deal back in Arizona, because when they were zone-based, zones are fairly large in central Arizona, so people would get alerts that were nowhere near the dust storm. Now that they're polygon-based, they can really target the people that will be impacted by the dust. These are for short duration events that involve a sudden drop in visibility, and dust storm warnings do go to EAS and WEA. We also have blowing dust warnings and blowing dust advisories. These are for when visibility will be between 1/4 mile and 1 mile. They're zone-based and are for longer duration events, greater than 90 minutes, and neither of these go to EAS or WEA.
So looking at the statistics, there were 20 dust storm LSRs for the entire state of Nebraska. And this is between the time period of 2010 through 2020. And then we kind of dug a little bit deeper since we kind of want to look for our forecast area, which would be the North Platte County warning area. So in the North Platte area, there was only 7 LSRs for this area. Then when we looked at the actual dust events where we had issued a headline of some sort, there was 11 of those. And that, again, was between that same time frame of 2010 to 2020. And there was none that were there was no dust events that happened in North Platte's CWA or County Warning Area. So then we looked at the LSRs by month, and we could see that there was two peaks during the year, February to April and the peak in March, and then September to November with the peak in October.
Next up, we looked at LSRs by source, and the largest source that we had was law enforcement. There were 6 reports from law enforcement. Next up was trained spotters with 5, and then the public, Department of Highways, and emergency managers, a fire department, and even a National Weather Service employee also reported dust events around Nebraska. We also wanted to look into the wind speeds that were associated with these LSRs. To do that, we found the nearest weather station to each of these LSR locations, and we looked at what the wind speed was at the nearest time to the LSR, and this is what we found. One interesting thing that we noticed was that the vast majority of these were between 20 and 40 miles per hour, which for Nebraska isn't particularly fast. Here's a map showing the locations of the dust LSRs and their sources. Most of these LSRs were in the southern half of the state. There weren't really any in the Panhandle, and only one up in the Sandhills, and none in the northeast part of the state. But they were in the southern half of the state, especially in southwest Nebraska.
So then we decided to break it down by land use types. So we used the USDA cropland data layer from Landsat 8 data, and this is the chart that we got. So the 2 highest ones were corn and developed land use types. Now, one thing to note is we do believe that it's being overrepresented for the developed land, because that might not necessarily be the source of the dust, since surrounding land use types might be more like corn or alfalfa. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that though it's one of the higher ones, we do think that the developed land use type is overrepresented. So here's that map with the LSRs overlaid on top of it, again from 2010 to 2020. You have the diamonds, those little red diamonds there. Those are representing our LSRs that we have. And the map here, if you look at the bottom left corner, that's going to represent all the different types of crops that are available in our area. So one thing to note is that a lot of it was agricultural areas where this dust LSRs occurred, as opposed to pasture areas. And now we'll take a look at some of our past cases.
There were a couple of dust events on March 6th through 7th, 2017, and we want to look at the precipitation for Nebraska at this time. It was slightly below normal for precipitation, and that's important leading up to a dust event, because if there's more precipitation, the ground is more saturated and the dirt tends to stay on the ground. It takes a lot more wind to loft it into the air. But when it's drier, it's easier for the wind to loft that dust into the air and start a dust storm. A strong cold front passed through Nebraska on March 6th through 7th, 2017, and we had 2 LSRs that came from this. One was in Adams County, 5 miles east-northeast of Air. The other one was in Dundee County, 3 miles south of Benkelman, and there were dust advisories out at both locations at these times. Looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor, we noticed that both counties associated with this are either located in a drought status or very near to areas of drought, which again is important because if the ground is drier, it's a lot easier for dust to be lofted into the air.
Okay, so the next case we're going to look at here is from March 6, 2018. And this is going to be for Dual and Garden counties in Nebraska. So if you're not familiar with that area, that's kind of western Nebraska. So what we're looking at is the chart on the left is going to be a map of the departure from normal precipitation for the month of February. So February 1st through February 28, 2018. And then the chart on the right is going to be the actual precipitation that occurred in the month of February. So let's look at the chart on the left first, and you can see there's a lot of areas, especially across western Nebraska and even into kind of that northeastern, eastern Nebraska, that saw that yellow color, which is going to be below normal. So for the counties of Dual and Garden, we had below normal precipitation that occurred for the month of February. And if we look at the actual precipitation on the right side, it's a lot of red across the state of Nebraska. So that's generally anywhere from a ½ inch to an inch, with some locations receiving less than a ½ inch. Okay, so we're going to look at now the drought monitor for the High Plains region here. And if you look at the upper left graphic, that is taken on February 6, 2018. So, just about a month prior to when the dust event occurred. So if you look at this location, which I'll kind of highlight here with that arrow, this is the general area we are looking at, Garden and Dual counties. That is a D0 for drought condition for that area. So that means it's abnormally dry. There's some patches just off to the west that is a D1, which is a moderate drought. So that area was pretty dry in early February. Now, if you look at the second graphic, the one on the bottom right there, that one is taken on February 27th, so just a week before this dust event. Now you'll notice that the actual counties of Garden and Dual are no longer classified into drought conditions. However, areas just to the west, the county just to the west of there, is still in that abnormally dry. So what we can infer from that is, although they were taken out of the drought, it's still pretty dry in that area. So we still have a lot of dry conditions for that. So what we actually had, or what occurred on March 6, 2018, we had Dual County to southwest of Big Springs that had an LSR report, and then in Garden County, Oshkosh. So both those counties had LSR report with them as far as dust reports go. So the last case that we're going to look at is April 17th and the 30th of 2018. So we're looking at the High Plains Drought Monitor. This is taken from March 27th of 2018, so just a couple weeks before the event happened. And as you can see in that circled area, that southern Nebraska, southeastern Nebraska area, that area is in a D0 drought or near the D0 drought area, so for abnormally dry conditions. And we had two storm reports here. One was from Dundee County and Binkelman, and then the other one was for Seward County, and that was to southeast of Goner. And for those who aren't familiar with that area, that is fairly close to the interstate there, off near Interstate 80, which will bring us into the event that actually took place on April 30th, and there was actually an event that took place the day before that on the 29th, but we did not have any LSRs for that date.
First, on April 29th, there was a 29 vehicle pileup on Interstate 80 that resulted in 14 injuries and 1 death. The next day, on April 30th, there was an 11 vehicle pileup, and the media reported multiple injuries in that area. The ground was dry and lacked vegetation, and at the same time, farmers were tilling their fields around the highway. Lincoln recorded wind gusts in the 60s on April 30th, and also on April 30th, a dust storm warning was in place. Here's a photo of what Interstate 80 looked like on April 30th. This photo is from the Omaha World-Herald. Visibility is dropped across the area, but if you're driving down the highway and you hit that first cloud of dust, that drop in visibility is going to be very extreme and come up very suddenly, which is especially dangerous for drivers. This is the result of that drop in visibility. This is a pileup on Interstate 80 by York on April 30th. We got this photo from the Omaha World-Herald, and you can see that there's still dust lingering in the area, but there's a massive pileup that happened on the highway. This is how it happens. One car will hit another, then they'll have to slow down, the next car will hit, and the chain can go on for miles because no one can see where they're going. This photo shows especially how bad that drop in visibility can be. If you're going down the highway at 80 miles an hour, there's no way that you'll be able to see what's inside that cloud of dust, which is why it's very dangerous to stay on the road while this is going on. One driver was quoted as saying all of a sudden it was a blackout. And even after the accident, you can see those trucks aren't very far away, but they're very difficult to see through the dust.
So here we're looking at one of those message boards that they now have out on interstates, at least on Interstate 80. There's quite a few of them out there. So it's something that we can use as the Weather Service for our advantage. We just need to make sure that we have that relationship with our partners. And across the state of Nebraska, we have a pretty good relationship with our Department of Roads. So if we let them know ahead of time that we're thinking this might be a pretty good likelihood that we could see some blowing dust, this is something they can put out as far as messaging to get that out to the motorists who will be driving on the roadway. And this is where we could put out our safety messaging so that we can alert them as to what to do if they find themselves in an area with blowing dust and low visibilities.
There was a dust event that occurred on October 11, 2020 in southwest Nebraska that included Dundee, Hitchcock, and Red Willow counties. This was associated with a cold front passage and the strong winds that went along with that front. The National Weather Service in Goodland used a blowing dust warning for Dundee County in this case. And remember, blowing dust warnings don't go to EAS or WIA. One thing that they did note after the event was that in the future it might help to use a dust storm warning instead of a blowing dust warning so that it does go to EAS and WIA in the future. Here's the graphic that the weather office in Goodland put out for this event, and you can see that it shows where the blowing dust warning was. It was in Kansas, Colorado, and just our corner of Nebraska, and the high wind warning that went along for a large chunk of Kansas and also a bit of eastern Colorado and southwest Nebraska. You'll see in this graphic that they did say that there would be a blowing dust warning, and they gave some information including northwest winds gusting to 60 miles an hour and blowing dust. They actually mentioned blowing dust in this graphic, which is very good. Reducing visibilities to less than 1/4 mile, which will make travel hazardous. It's good that they highlighted the fact that travel will become hazardous.
So like I said, again, messaging is one of the big things that we need to, as a weather service, kind of look at, especially for those of us in Nebraska, because, this is a very familiar for us. So how to message. Messaging via social media is the key. That's one of the sources to get out there to the public. Another thought that we were discussing is that possibly using our one-pagers or our situation reports. I guess now they're called weather reports, but to add confidence in the possibility of seeing blowing dust. So if we see these signals, we could show our confidence of the possibility of having that blowing dust and alert our partners ahead of time. We also, work really close to the Nebraska Pathfinders. So those of you who are within the Weather Service working for a Nebraska office know that we are able to chat with this group here. And we can alert them ahead of time, give them a day notice or even, prior to the event. If we believe that there's a good possibility of blowing dust, they could put it out on the message boards. And then providing the information on what to do if you find yourself driving through a dust storm on those message boards as well. So that's another thing that we really have to educate our partners to let them know what they should do during a dust storm, and then that way they can spread the message as well. So that's another thing.
There's a saying that was coined by the Arizona Department of Transportation that goes, "Pull aside, stay alive." And this is frequently used by the National Weather Service in Phoenix and Tucson. And what pull aside, stay alive is it outlines the steps of what to do if you're driving and a dust storm comes along, because this happens all the time between Phoenix and Tucson. There's highways that go through there, and serious dust storms can really impact traffic and make for dangerous road conditions. So these are the steps. First, is to pull completely off the road so that you're not in any other vehicle's way. Second is to put the vehicle in park. Third is to turn off all vehicle lights, and fourth, to keep your foot off the brake. This might seem counterintuitive at first, because why would you want to turn your lights off and keep your foot off the brake if the visibility is dropping and you can't see so well? It's because of something known as the moth effect. Moths like to travel towards light. Everyone who's seen these bugs has noticed that. Humans, when they're driving, are kind of the same way. When you're driving, you subconsciously want to follow the taillights that are in front of you. Well, in a dust storm, if you're pulled over to the side of the road and your taillights are on or your brake lights are on, someone might think that you're moving down the road and they'll try to follow you. But of course, you're not moving and they'll hit you, and that will result in a car accident. So, when you pull off the road, you'll want to turn off your lights so that no one will think that you're moving and no one will try to follow you. At the same time, once you're pulled over, you'll want to keep your seatbelt fastened, because even after following all these steps, an accident could still happen, and only resume driving once the storm has passed and visibility has returned. Here's a dust safety graphic that the National Weather Service in Phoenix used, and a few things that it highlights which are good are the fact that zero visibility can happen in a dust storm, which will lead to dangerous driving conditions, and it outlines the steps of pull aside, stay alive. The more that we put that out there, the more that people will remember it and hopefully know what to do if they find themselves going down the road and a dust storm comes along. This is another graphic from the weather office in Phoenix about an event that was going to happen that day and what people should do. This one's good because it expresses timing. You can see on that map in the lower right hand corner where the dust will be and when, which roads will be impacted, and it reminds everyone about what to do if they find themselves driving and a dust storm happens.
So here's one of the graphics that's put out by the National Weather Service. So it's one of the generic ones that anybody can use. So it gives some dust storm safety tips. And here's one that Sam and I worked on with the dust storm safety. If anybody else wants to use this template, we would be happy to share it with other offices. You can just tailor it to your office. We have in the bottom left corner our office, North Platte, but you can change that out to whatever WFO office you are located at. And that concludes our presentation. Thanks for listening.